Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, September the 17th, 2025. Today there is an opposition aspect between Mercury in Virgo and Saturn in Pisces. And I think that this aspect could be quite a significant event, not just as something isolated, but as part of a larger configuration. But I'll be talking about that later in the video. First of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, September the 17th. And here is the chart for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So turning to this chart, the moon is now in Leo at sort of noon today, Wednesday, and the moon went into Leo, well, London time at 6:20 a.m. So if you're in the Americas, the moon would have gone into Leo sort of in the middle of the night. In fact, if you were in on the West Coast, on the Pacific Coast, the moon would have gone into Leo sort of last night, late on Monday. So there is a change. Moon is no longer in Cancer, and now that it's in Leo, there is a change. I mean, the moon, you could say, loses strength because of this changeover. The moon in its own sign in Cancer, also pretty close to a conjunction of Jupiter, and then everything changes. Moon moves into Leo. And Leo is a sign that the moon is not particularly happy in, all things being equal. I mean, Leo is quite a hot sign. It's high temperature. It's sort of a masculine, positive sign, whereas moon is sort of more receptive, feminine planet, and just Leo can just be a bit too much. I mean, moon in Leo likes getting attention, that's for sure, but it's not always very easy about it. It can feel sort of a bit overwhelmed at times. So there is a negative side to the moon being in Leo. On the other hand, the moon is moving into a fire sign. We've also got Venus in Leo, so there is some focus still on this sign, Leo. Remember, Venus is now in very late Leo. It's getting ready to move into Virgo. And so, the Leo season, what's left of it, well, there's still something left, but not for much longer. And the moon, while it's moving in Leo, through Leo, well, you could say that the main aspect is moon opposition Pluto. Moon in Leo, Pluto in Aquarius. Now that aspect might be about identity. I mean, moon in Leo values itself, wants to be heard, wants attention in Leo, even if there is a bit of uncertainty about it all. Can it really see it through, and can be a bit nervous and self-conscious. And its opposition Pluto in Aquarius, can be quite harsh. Pluto in Aquarius isn't necessarily about attention, the individual, and so some of us might want to be in the spotlight, but it could just be all too much with that moon opposition Leo, and we may find that we're having to hide ourselves, that we can't really show the world, who we are, or what we want. But that's looking at things from our perspective. But it's not just us; it's everyone. Some people are feeling that it's just all too much, and if they were to try to get attention, who knows what might happen. People are afraid. Of course, there is a lot of fear around, isn't there? You don't have to be in a totalitarian state to be afraid. I think that people in democracies are afraid, and certainly looking at people's reactions in the United States, where I am, people are afraid to express their opinions. They have opinions, but they're just afraid that something might notice what they're doing, might spy on them, and somehow, for example, in local politics, they make an application to the city to make a change to their house and redevelopment, and perhaps someone's noticed that they posted something on social media, they'd attack the city, and they might find that their application is refused. I mean, that's my experience of America, at least this little part of America. And so maybe that's one way in which moon opposition Pluto is working. I mean, maybe I'm just talking about my obsessions here, things that I'm interested in, things that I have noticed. And aside from that, well, there's the big aspect today, probably the most important aspect, and that is an opposition between Mercury and Saturn. And there are a number of ways of looking at Mercury opposition Saturn. I mean, I will be going into greater detail about Mercury opposition Saturn later in this video, but one way of looking at Mercury opposition Saturn is to say, could just be depressed. Okay, I don't mean depressed in a clinical sense, but just feeling a bit down, as that Mercury opposition Saturn becomes exact, feeling negative. It's all a waste of time. What is the point? And, you interpret everything in the worst possible light. So if you do find that happening today, regardless of your sign, perhaps you can reassure yourself by saying, well, it's just Mercury opposition Saturn. It will pass. And another, perhaps more active way of looking at Mercury opposition Saturn is to look at it in terms of language. Now, of course, one way of seeing Mercury opposition Saturn is to say nothing. Mercury is about communication. Mercury opposition Saturn, you are kept quiet. You can't say a word, and so there is an alternative view. It can be about harsh words. Yeah, it can be active. If there's Mercury opposition Saturn, then people may be quite insulting, demeaning, and they don't know how else to respond except to sort of cut people down with harsh words. Maybe other people's harsh words, maybe your harsh words, but if you feel that people are unsympathetic, are unpleasant, they are insulting, again, you don't necessarily get too upset about it. It just might be because of this Mercury opposition Saturn. Though, if you want to be positive about Mercury opposition Saturn, you could just say it's hard work, being able to focus. And turning to the picture for Sydney, Australia. So at noon in Sydney, Australia, as a representative of Australasia, the moon is still in Cancer. So if you are in Australasia or Kamchatka or East Asia, then this morning, a moon is in late Cancer. It may not feel that much is going on. The moon is pretty much void of course. It's kind of making a square to Mars, so it's not necessarily void of course. Very sort of really early in the morning, but moon square Saturn, moon square Mars. Feeling the aftermath of that. So there could be a sort of agitation this morning, and a feeling that you can't really get anything done, and things making you annoyed. But then, sort of early afternoon, the moon will move into Leo. So there is a bit of a difference there in Australasia. But elsewhere, Europe, as I said, Europe and the Americas, it's very much a moon in Leo day. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the Sun at the center of the solar system, and Mercury is moving towards a square of Jupiter. So you've got sort of mixed messaging there. So geocentrically, we've got Mercury opposition Saturn. Heliocentrically, we've got Mercury square Jupiter. And maybe if we try to combine those two aspects, Mercury square Jupiter indicates that we feel the desire to say something. We have ideas. Perhaps the universe is talking to us, is challenging us with ideas, but with Mercury opposition Saturn, geocentrically, down here on Earth, it might not be quite so easy to express those ideas. So, if you find yourself tongue-tied, and I think many of us might feel tongue-tied today, regardless of our sign. Again, don't worry, and maybe there is a way of communicating, but we don't want to be too brutal about it, because with geocentrically Mercury opposition Saturn, if we are insulting or we use bad language, the fundamental cause of that might be our frustration. Things aren't moving. We're feeling negative, so we might have to lash out. Now, another heliocentric aspect that we need to pay attention to is Earth conjunct Saturn. Now, Earth conjunct Saturn is the same as the Sun opposition Saturn geocentrically. But, with those heliocentric conjunctions, geocentric oppositions, I sometimes think that the heliocentric conjunction is sort of more descriptive, and you could say that the Earth is now sort of moving into Saturn's sort of shadow, and there is perhaps a darkness coming across us. I mean, we don't want to exaggerate, though, do we? But certainly a negativity. Now, it's not an unusual aspect, of course. I mean, every year the Earth will make a conjunction to Saturn, in the same way that every year the Sun will make an opposition to Saturn at exactly the same time. I mean, it's the same aspect, but just seen from a different view. And so, given what we know about what's going on in the world anyway, that we are living in difficult times, and that Earth conjunct Saturn may really sort of bring it home to us. And already it's Wednesday today, but we're starting to feel it. And of course, as we move into the weekend, that Earth conjunct Saturn is going to be especially powerful. So I think that's the main thing to say about the heliocentric view. I mean, Mars is still making a trine to Jupiter, but it's not exact anymore, heliocentrically that is. And so, we have energy. We feel we should be doing things, but maybe at the same time, we come up with reasons why we can't, because of that geocentric Mercury opposition Saturn, which, as I've already said, I think is the main aspect of the day. So, having had a look at the overall planetary picture, I now want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, September the 17th, 2025. Aries. I'm hoping that the last couple of days have been quite grounding. They've allowed you to find your feet, understand what is going on around you, and perhaps you became aware of your limitations. But you can't keep sort of going on that track forever. You have at some stage got to spread your wings, and now that the moon is moving into Leo, things are changing. I think that you can be more optimistic, and you can start to think about what might be possible. And it's very important to have a belief in yourself, and perhaps that belief recently might have been lacking, but things are changing. And so with the moon in Leo, with the moon being in a fire sign, Aries, do think about your general capability. What can you do that other people can't do? And a sure test of that is whether or not you're enjoying yourself. It is important to have fun, and it's important to be doing something that is meaningful, and at the same time you shouldn't be too self-conscious. The moon, as it moves into early Leo, does make an opposition to Pluto, and this opposition to Pluto might encourage you to think about yourself from an alternative perspective. Perhaps you might be thinking, well, how do other people see you? How does society see you? Is what you're doing really the right thing? Maybe you're embarrassing yourself. Maybe you're out of sync with the times in which you're living. So, these sort of thoughts may crop up, and they may be intensified by the fact that Mercury is making an opposition to Saturn. Now, the Mercury opposition Saturn does not affect you directly. Mercury in Virgo, opposition Saturn in Pisces. But, it does create a general atmosphere of negativity and over-reflection. And I would suggest, Aries, that you just remember who you are. You are someone who is independent, and you don't have to worry too much about what other people are thinking, what they might be thinking. You could have all sorts of stories about what people are thinking about you, how they're judging you, and it may or may not be the case. The key thing is, Aries, that you are doing something that you enjoy, and that you're feeling fulfilled. And in fact, Aries, your ability to get on with people right now is pretty good. I don't think you're going to do anything that is embarrassing or sort of raises questions. I think that you're going to be able to explain yourself extremely well. In fact, it may not be about explaining. It may just be about demonstrating who you are, demonstrating what you can do, demonstrating that sort of natural Aries spark. And so if you can get through that, then I don't think you've really got much to worry about. And, maybe, Aries, the real situation is that, a lot of people may be feeling down. They may be feeling quite negative, because of this Mercury opposition Saturn. And they need to be distracted. They need to be inspired. And, Aries, this is perhaps something you can do. And you may be facilitated by the fact that we've got a trine aspect between Mars and Jupiter. That Mars-Jupiter trine. When I say trine, I'm talking about a heliocentric trine. This heliocentric trine, it's still there, very much in evidence, and that just further helps you in terms of being yourself, being positive, and being perhaps able to cut through other people's negativity. And also that means, of course, you've got to cut through any feelings of negativity that you yourself might have. And this does mean that if you make the effort, you don't have to make too much of an effort. If you just be yourself, then I'm confident that relationships, for example, in all their many kinds, in all their various forms, can be pretty successful. It's because you can be yourself, and that's why it matters. That's what actually people want. Now, you might think that you have to behave in a particular way, but that's not necessarily the case. I think the real truth of the matter is that what people want is for you to just be natural and exciting and to be spontaneous. And so it's all there. And if you can just be yourself and not be self-conscious, then I'm thinking that it should be a reasonable day. Taurus. Venus is still in Leo, but it's in pretty late Leo now. At sort of noon New York time, Venus is at 27:44 Leo. Now, that has implications for you because when Venus changes sign, when Venus moves out of Leo into Virgo, Taurus, that will shift things. But right now Venus is not just in late Leo, but it's conjunct Regulus. Regulus is the royal star. So Taurus, it really is a time when you can demonstrate something special. Because remember, Taurus, but the royal star may be about connections. It's about being important. It's about being regal. It's about connecting with people who have power and influence. And with Venus conjunct Regulus, you're kind of like a beacon. You're attracting things, even if you're doing nothing. You think you're doing nothing, but nonetheless, something is definitely going on, and you absolutely need to believe that is possible. So when you look at yourself and everything going on around you, don't feel that you're on your own, and don't feel that you're not good enough, or don't be overwhelmed or overawed by another person. They might seem to be someone who is very powerful, influential, and inaccessible, but right now a lot of people are accessible, and so it might be a good time, in your own quiet way, to perhaps be sending letters, trying to make connections. It might seem a waste of time, but I don't think it is necessarily going to be a waste of time. And with Venus conjunct Regulus, and Venus will be conjunct Regulus for the next few days. With Venus conjunct Regulus, you can come over as someone who is important, and people might be attracted to you for that reason. And it's then very important that you're able to get over any feelings of negativity you might have. And I'm sorry to talk about this word negativity, but for one reason or another, there is a lot of negativity flying around today, and it's not necessarily real. It's about perceptions, and from your perspective, there's some possibility that you really are seeing sort of a harshness around you. You see blocks, you see frustration. You think about all the reasons why you can't do something, why it might be impossible, why there's no point in doing anything, and your thoughts could drift further. You could become sort of pessimistic, fatalistic, believe that something bad could happen. So that might be something that you're going through, and in certain cases, Taurians, their thoughts might drift to sort of death and destruction. I mean, I'm not saying in every case, but it's something that you have to be aware of. So if you do have morbid thoughts, thinking about death and destruction, for example, don't worry about it. It's just the way it goes. We all think about death and destruction at times, or at least I do, but maybe I'm just projecting. I mean, I've got Taurus rising, so maybe that's just me. But I think that you shouldn't allow yourself to dwell on such subjects unless you want to. I mean, sometimes we find it reassuring to think about death, and a walk in the graveyard, for example, can be sort of very sort of stilling in its own way. And maybe also some Taurians might be just interested in death, true crime, having perhaps a certain fascination with recent horrible events, or even historical horrible events. So I mean, that is a dimension to it. But I'm just saying that I don't want you to start to see this in a sort of a negative way, and to think that there's nothing you can do, that you're somehow stuck. You're not stuck at all. There's no need to feel frustrated. And although many Taurians are going to want to keep a relatively low profile, you shouldn't think that there isn't a world around you. And as I've said, there's something about you that is special, that is outstanding, that can be attractive to people who might on the surface have a higher status than you. And so with Venus on Regulus, really do appreciate your own regality, because you can sort of rise above the mess, rise above the chaos and the frustrations around you, and you can get attention and get attention from the right people. You have to make an effort, but not necessarily too much of an effort. Gemini. Mercury is now making an opposition to Saturn. I mean, that this aspect has arrived, and in this video I will be going into detail about this opposition at the end of this video, and naturally it affects you because Mercury is your ruler. And so with Mercury opposition Saturn, it could be that you're feeling unusually negative. You might be thinking about all the things that might be possible and how things could work out, and as far as you're concerned, it might just seem that really things aren't going anywhere and that there is no point. And that is a common Gemini thought. What is the point? And you think about existence and you get all existential about it, and you think about the absurdity of life, and Mercury opposition Saturn can really reinforce that. And maybe that's just intensifying what it means to be a Gemini. And so the question is, Gemini, what do you do about it? Now, you might just regard this as just a phase. You take the view that today you're just going to be negative. Not just today. Over the next couple of days, you might be brooding, and you might just think, well, just go with it. And that sooner or later things will change. Mercury will move into Libra. In fact, the Sun will move into Libra soon enough, and Sun and Mercury moving into Libra, all things being equal, should cheer you up. But at the moment with Mercury opposition Saturn, many Geminis just might just be feeling not particularly happy, and they may even be reveling in it. When I was in therapy a few decades ago. When was I in therapy? In the 90s, I went into therapy, and I had a Scorpio therapist, and he said that people that are happy all the time are sick. And maybe that's what you should be thinking, to reassure yourself if you happen to be feeling miserable. And so that's one way of looking at Mercury opposition Saturn. There are other ways of looking at it. I mean, Mercury is the communication planet. Gemini is a pretty communicative sign, and all things being equal. And so, with Mercury opposition Saturn, how are you going to speak? What kind of language are you going to use? And Geminis can be very sharp, and they can be, quite good at sort of throwing off one-liners without really thinking about it, without thinking about how other people are going to respond. And so some Geminis might be quite offensive. You might say things which are upsetting or seem to disregard another person's feelings. You could do it. I mean, Geminis can do it. It may not just be through the spoken word. It might be that you quickly send an email or a text message and you weren't really thinking about it. Mercury opposition Saturn, and what you're doing might be dismissing another person's feelings. And so be very careful about how you communicate with Mercury opposition Saturn, because you just might say something on the spur of a moment, and then perhaps later you'll realize that what you did wasn't really so sensible. And there are ways of looking at this Mercury opposition Saturn. It's got so many kind of dimensions here, and Mercury opposition Saturn could additionally be about external pressure. Pressure, for example, from authority figures. It might be authority figures within your family. It might be authority figures at work. It might just be the pressures of society, and it might be you wanting to do things your way. You are quite happy doing things your way, and you've almost created sort of a verbal mental bubble around yourself, and you're happy in this space. And then there's pressure from outside, and you don't want to respond to this pressure. That's Saturn in Pisces, but probably you should respond to this pressure. Saturn is not necessarily an entirely negative force. Saturn has gone back into Pisces for a reason, and it means something for you. And with Saturn in Pisces, it is about potentially your ambitions, what is important for you, and perhaps you have another chance to revisit some of your ambitions. Some things that you thought you couldn't do, and now you have another chance. It's just easier to ignore it all and just to be completely satisfied where you are, to tell yourself a story. Well, you tried it in the past, it didn't work, and now it's coming back. And so Saturn may not represent anything external. I think it could. It could be some authority figure telling you to do something or encouraging you to do something, but it could be your own inner authority figure telling you that, hold on, there's something you've missed. You cannot be complacent. And it might be that however hard you try to shut your eyes to opportunity, that you're being told there is an opportunity out there, something you've missed, something you need to really work towards. And so Gemini, do bear that in mind. And in that sense, the Mercury-Saturn opposition might not just be challenging, it might be important. And Saturn may be a planet that's trying to do you a favor, that is trying to encourage you to make the most of what you have, and not just to give up on it or sort of rest on your laurels. Cancer. You probably feel a sense that you have things, other people have things, you have your contribution, other people have their contribution, and the question is, how does it all fit together? And right now you may be concerned that there is just a mismatch. I mean, understanding, your priorities, other people's priorities, it doesn't come together. And so it could be, a difficult time for you as far as, just getting on with people. And there may be a lot of power games, for example, people, trying to do one thing after another, trying to sort of gain some kind of advantage for themselves. And you have your own views, and you may be, particularly aware of, what you have and what you don't have, and perhaps what people are trying to get from you. And, this perhaps is a reminder that it might be a sort of a dog-eat-dog world. Well, it is a dog-eat-dog world in some respects. People can talk about teamwork and community and cooperation as much as they like, but the reality is that there is a lot of competition out there. And from your perspective, you may realize that you have to fight for what you have, fight for what's important, and not just give in or try to be pleasant and trying to be cooperative. It's just a front, isn't it? And the reality is much harsher. And so, Cancer, in your own way, you are sort of pretty down to earth right now. and you understand that nothing can be taken for granted, and you need to perhaps be very straightforward to yourself about where your own interests lie, and particularly those interests that have a material and a financial dimension. And if you stick to what is true and what is obvious, you'll be fine. I mean, it's possible that there are outside forces that are trying to make things more complicated than they actually are. They may be even trying to make you feel guilty, but those forces, need to be probably rejected. It's all very simple if you can see things from your own perspective in your own way, and not allow yourself to be distracted, and not allow yourself also to be put off by other people's clever words. And some people do have clever words. People might say things that are unexpected, that you hadn't prepared for, and you might feel that you have to respond. That when you try to respond, you might feel that your answers aren't good enough, and so it is possible that if you start to engage in a conversation, the conversation perhaps goes in a way that you weren't particularly or aren't particularly happy about, and you might be encouraged to make decisions or agree to things that you later regret. So don't be caught out by other people's clever words. I mean, perhaps impressive on the surface, but deep down I'm not quite so convinced. So Cancer, it may be a day when it's best to be quite independent-minded, and well, not just independent-minded. You need to be independent, and you need to be thinking about yourself, and not getting sidetracked. And I think that's the main theme. I mean, I'd like to be more positive. I try my hardest to be positive, believe it or not. But I just think it's a day when you need to, think about your own priorities and not worry too much about what's going on out there, and don't get caught up in anyone's clever words. I mean, if anyone's using clever words, it should be you. And if you want to use words effectively, I think you can. If you want to cut someone down to size, Cancer, with just a few words, you'll be very good at it. So if someone is annoying you and pressurizing you, okay, it's not about lashing out angrily, but it is perhaps about making it clear that you need to be taken seriously, and perhaps telling someone to back off or to shut up. Using a few words, using perhaps a few witticisms. You might not be planning on being witty, but somehow you will have a way with words. I mean, many Cancerians do have a way with words. I mean, there are sort of many good writers who have their sun in Cancer. Hunter, or is it? I don't know, Hunter S. Thompson, Ernest Hemingway, Cancerians. But you'll be able to get your words together, and if you use your words effectively, I think you can put people in their place. Leo, the moon is moving into your sign, and moon moving into your sign, I would have said, was something that was good. I mean, I think it's good news. I mean, the moon has been in Cancer for a few days, and with the moon in Cancer, it may be, Leo, that you felt okay in your own space, but you weren't really ready to take on anything. You just wanted to work things out in your own way. But now that the moon moves into Leo, you can be sort of more positive, more definite. The moon is now in a fire sign, and as well as being in your sign, and also it joins Venus. So now you've got moon and Venus in Leo, and so you could argue that next day or two, well, it's as good as it gets with Leo. I mean, Venus, because Venus is in Leo, but Venus is about to leave Leo. It's about to move into Virgo, and then of course the Moon will move out of Leo in a couple of days' time. So perhaps it's an opportunity to really take advantage of things and finally to express what you believe. And recently you might have been holding back. You felt that now wasn't the right time, and it's important that you have confidence. The Moon in Leo likes attention, as I said at the beginning of this video, but there can be a fragility to that attention. You want attention, but it's easy perhaps to knock your confidence. And so with Moon in Leo, you've got to hold firm. Moon Leo, Leo is a fixed sign, and so Moon in Leo, once you set out your stall and you've expressed yourself, then you need to hold firm and not be intimidated. I mean, you shouldn't be intimidated, because Venus is certainly going to help. Venus, is it's a socially orientated planet, and it's conjunct Regulus. That helps. You can kind of sort of project those Regulus vibes, regality, importance, being the center of things. Even if you don't feel yourself to be the center of things, you can perhaps make yourself the center of things, by holding firm and not allowing yourself to be intimidated or to be sort of put in your place by other people and the things other people are saying. There is an opposition aspect between Mercury and Saturn today, and I think that this Mercury-Saturn opposition may not be very helpful, and you might experience that Mercury opposition Saturn through another person, by the things someone says. And the things people say can be quite devastating. I mean, you can have plans, ideas you've been working on, you might have been working on for years. I'm not saying this is the case, but it can happen for years, and you're just told that doesn't work, and then you suddenly feel, oh, okay, that's it. A couple of years of work down the drain, gone. Maybe the person was right, maybe the person was wrong, but words can sting, and so don't necessarily take people's words too seriously, even if it is meant as genuinely constructive criticism. You don't want to be flawed by it, and also criticism can take many forms, and it can take the form of self-criticism. And there is a possibility, Leo, that you're quite harsh on yourself. So don't be too down. And I know that sort of over the last couple of days there have been moments of great optimism, and there was that Moon-Jupiter conjunction, yesterday. But some of that optimism is diminishing, but it's still there. You still have the ability to be optimistic, and perhaps now you need to be optimistic. So you perhaps have to make a special effort to sort of bring that optimism, to the surface, and not allow yourself to be cowed by other people's responses to you. Which brings me on to the subject of relationships. I would love to say something positive about relationships, and it's just astrology. Maybe things will be fine, but all things being equal, I would not have said that today was going to be particularly good as far as getting on with people on a one-to-one level. For one thing, there's an opposition aspect between the Moon and Pluto. That Moon-Pluto opposition is going to perhaps manifest as sort of power struggles, or you being overly self-conscious, or you feeling that in spite of your best efforts, that someone has the upper hand, and you're not quite sure what kind of game someone is playing. And okay, it might be all in your head. You might be just imagining that someone has more power than they actually have, but still, it's not very helpful. And additionally, we have an opposition between Mercury and Saturn, and Mercury opposition Saturn, it can be about harsh words and how someone is treating you and what they are saying to you. And however much you care about someone, people can always be harsh. People can always be negative, and it's not just what they do say, it's also what they don't say. Maybe you need encouragement, and you're with someone and they don't give you encouragement. You want them to say something nice and they don't say anything nice, and perhaps you just don't want to be in that kind of situation. And so maybe one-to-one relationships can be left for another day. Virgo, inevitably we have to talk about Mercury being opposition Saturn. Mercury is moving through your sign, right at the end of your sign. It's getting ready to move into Libra, and Mercury today makes this opposition, and so Mercury represents you. Saturn represents perhaps opposition, doubt, self-doubt, running into trouble, conflict. So all of these things can be manifestations of Mercury opposition Saturn. I mean, there is a positive side to Mercury opposition Saturn, of course. I mean, it can be very disciplined. It can encourage you to really get yourself together. But all things being equal, I would have said that the most likely manifestation of Mercury opposition Saturn is that you would perhaps have doubts about yourself. I mean, Virgo is a self-critical sign, and at the best of times. I mean, it's good to be self-critical, to always think that things could be taken further, and that you're not putting in as much effort as you should. So I mean, it can move you to really put a lot of effort into something, and that there's a favorable aspect to that. But with Mercury opposition Saturn, you just could look at yourself and look at what's happening, and you might think, well, it's all going nowhere, and you might be tempted to sort of give up on things and to regard the whole situation as being hopeless. Now, I absolutely don't want to create self-fulfilling prophecies here. And I'm not saying that this is the case. I'm just saying you might think it's the case. And so under those circumstances, Virgo, I think it's important that you are as positive as possible. Because, if you can be positive about yourself while Mercury is opposition Saturn, well, that would be great, because it would mean that you are being realistic. And realistic means being realistic. Realistic means taking the middle ground, not being over-optimistic, not being over-pessimistic, just dealing with reality as you find it. And so with Mercury opposition Saturn, just, don't get too upset if you start having negative feelings. They might be just something that's just passing, and so things will start to improve sooner or later. So there's nothing bad about Mercury opposition Saturn, and also Mercury opposition Saturn can indeed be motivating. If you haven't been pulling your weight, if you had perhaps been sloppy in the past. I'm sure you haven't been sloppy in the past, but if you have been sloppy in the past, Mercury opposition Saturn can really encourage you to get yourself together and be very grounded about it. Don't feel that there's anything dramatic that you have to do, though in certain cases some Virgos may respond to this Mercury opposition Saturn by uncharacteristic behavior which is strangely uncharacteristically impulsive. And if you are impulsive today, you do something you hadn't planned for, you hadn't worked it through, well, you might come a cropper. And it might be the case that your probability of messing something up, having some kind of accident, breaking something, is perhaps higher than usual. But that would only be because you were feeling frustrated, you didn't know what to do, perhaps you were feeling angry, and so that energy gets misdirected. And it goes without saying, perhaps, with Mercury opposition Saturn, Mercury opposition Saturn, across the main axis of your chart, that your relations with other people may not be great. They may not be as good as they were yesterday. And, this Mercury opposition Saturn, is going to be around for a bit longer. And so don't take anyone too seriously. Don't take anyone's words or reactions too seriously. And of course, the closer you get to someone, the more likely it is that you will take them seriously. And so, if you are too close to someone, they might sort of tie you up in knots. And perhaps it's a situation where just you need to be as independent as possible, to think about yourself and your own needs. And just remember that not everyone is your friend, and do consider other people's motives. People say things to you, and as far as they're concerned, or they might say on the surface that they're just being honest, they're just trying to be helpful, but maybe not. Maybe they've got motivations that are not particularly pleasant, or they're trying to sort of play with the sort of the power equation. And so I think it's important that you recognize other people, you recognize their existence, and you perhaps listen to what they say, but it's just very important that you don't take anyone and their words too seriously. Libra. When we're talking about astrology, so much of it is perception. It would be nice to make astrological forecasts, and one could sort of accurately predict real events, and sometimes that happens, but very often we're talking about how people feel, and it is kind of vague, and if one wants to be skeptical about it, well, it's difficult to prove or disprove. And I think that the cognitive side of things, and the way we feel, the way we think, is especially important at the moment. And perhaps this has something to do with the fact that we've got an opposition aspect between Mercury and Saturn right now. And as I've already said, this Mercury-Saturn opposition can make many of us feel just, rather down. We might just have feelings of negativity. It just might be that nothing seems to be working. This is not a great time for us, and it's all a bit difficult. And as far as you're concerned, Libra, I think that you do pick up on this, and I think that many Librans could have real feelings of negativity, and perhaps assuming the worst. And I'm not saying this is the case, and just because we assume the worst doesn't mean that the worst is going to happen. In fact, it just might be just the way you feel. And as far as the objective facts of the matter are concerned, there's nothing to worry about, or even things might be going very well for you, but for some reason you don't see it like that, and you just concentrate on the problems. And so, Libra, I would suggest that today you are as positive as possible, and that you really make the most of what you have. And one thing that is happening today, well, not just today, but over the next few days, is that Venus is conjunct Regulus. Regulus is the royal star, and it's a very fortunate star. And so with Venus conjunct Regulus, as it's moving into late Leo and into Virgo, having your ruler on Regulus, should give you an objective boost. It can make you stronger, more powerful, more influential. It gives you a chance to make the most of everyone around you, and make the most, also of, vague connections you might have. So, do think about everyone everyone around you. Think about how they can help, because you're not alone. And I think that Venus conjunct Regulus should give you a real lift, but you've got to be aware of it. And I think it's just very important, Libra, that you aren't too negative. And I just think for some reason you could be. Your first impressions might be that this is all very difficult, and things could be moving in a way that you're not happy with, and you can't see any possibility of change. But I think that approach would be flawed. And additionally, we've got the moon moving into Leo, because the moon was in Cancer, and I was very positive when the moon was in Cancer. The moon was making a conjunction to Jupiter in Cancer. Okay, that moon-Jupiter conjunction has gone, but the moon is in Leo, and Leo is a positive sign. Leo and Libra have a natural connection with one another, and I think that the moon in Leo should help you as far as getting on with people. And so that emphasizes the point that the social aspect of things could really matter today. And I think it's probably important that you don't try to do everything on your own. You don't see everything just in terms of yourself. I think that Librans are a social animal, and I think that today you very much need to recognize that. And at the same time, you have to consider your own individuality, and what you've got to offer, and the things you regard as being personally important. But you shouldn't see a contrast there. It's not like says your interests, other people's interests. You might think that the two really are at odds with one another, but today I don't think that they are. And so attitude is going to matter today. Attitude really is going to matter. And if you have the right attitude, then I think that there's no reason why today can't be sort of pretty smooth and have a favourable conclusion. So do bear that in mind. Scorpio, your ambitions do matter. I've probably said this before, but I'm saying it again. And Scorpio, there are things that you feel are important, and this is especially the case now that the moon has moved into Leo. And perhaps the challenge with the moon in Leo, don't forget, when the moon moves into Leo, it makes an opposition to Pluto. Perhaps the challenge here is to take what you have, take the things that you regard as being integral to yourself, and then project them outwards. Let people see, let the world see. Yet many Scorpios might feel they don't want to do that. The trouble is that interacting with the world does involve the risk of disclosure. I mean, no one likes disclosing things, especially if you're a Scorpio. And so if you keep everything secret, if you keep everything to yourself, then what can happen? Well, maybe not much can happen. There is this feeling, isn't there, that you have something you're working on, and it's important, and you regard it as being something very special to yourself, and you have this idea that if you were to reveal it, then there might be a negative reaction. That's one possibility. Or if it's something something that you regard as being original, then your ideas might be stolen, there might be plagiarism or something like that. So you have all these reasons why you can't reveal things. But in the end, you're not going to live forever. And do you want to take it to your grave? I mean, I know that that's a quite sort of morbid way of thinking about it, but I think that, when we do have secrets, whoever we are, whatever our sign is, if we do have secrets that we're really obsessed about keeping, there is that question: do we want to take it to our grave? Is it that important, or do you want to reveal it at some stage? And it's not about how old you are. We can have brilliant insights in our 20s, and we just don't want to talk about them, and we'd never want to talk about them, and we still manage to take it to our grave. I mean, I don't know, I'm not dead yet, but I think that there is that possibility. So the issue of openness, Scorpio, at the moment, could be quite important, and I think that there are things that perhaps you do need to be open about, which for one reason or another you're keeping to yourself, and you have to ask yourself, is that the right approach? And I think that there will be moments of, when you can disclose. You don't have to disclose everything, but just disclosing a bit, and just seeing what happens. And in general, Scorpio, the Moon and Venus are in Leo. It's not just the Moon. You've got Venus is conjunct Regulus in Leo, the royal star, and this does mean that if you play it right, Scorpio, it can be a time of recognition, and I think that people will take you seriously, but you've got to give them something to work on. If you just keep everything to yourself, well, you can't expect to be taken seriously. You can't even expect to be acknowledged. And additionally, I think that right now, if you make the effort, you're quite good at dealing with people. You might not think you are, but actually you are. We've still got Venus sextile Mars. Yesterday we had the exact Venus sextile Mars, but still there, that aspect. It's still in operation. And that Venus sextile Mars is about you winning people over, getting their support, and getting on with people at whatever level you want to get on with them, whether it's one-to-one or in a group collectively. And additionally, you can be dynamic. Heliocentrically, we got Mars trine Jupiter. Mars is your ruler. Mars trine Jupiter does allow you to really be yourself, be someone who can be taken seriously, and also someone who can be quite inspiring. That is all possible, Scorpio, and you do have a choice. And I think that it's perhaps important, Scorpio, that you don't take yourself too seriously. Sure, you're a Scorpio, you have to take yourself seriously to an extent, but you don't want to take things too far. Sagittarius. It should be an easier, more open day than yesterday. I mean, yesterday wasn't a bad day. And I think that yesterday had an intensity to it, and I think it could have been a day that was pretty constructive. But now there is a change of emphasis as the moon changes sign. It moves from Cancer into Leo. The moon moves into a fire sign, and perhaps Sagittarius, you're feeling just easier, that there's more room to sort of move and breathe, and it's always nice to have the moon in a fire sign if you're a Sagittarian. There are perhaps opportunities that weren't there sort of earlier in the week, and now you can sort of be yourself, and also you are perhaps encouraged to move beyond things. You don't have to be stuck in one place, stuck in one state of mind. You can think about something else, and perhaps move onto territory which may not be entirely familiar, but if something is new, that does attract your curiosity. And so when your curiosity is being sated, when you're finding things that are interesting, then that just makes life so much easier, and it just encourages you. And maybe while Moon was in Cancer, you did some preparation. You were thinking about things. You were taking yourself and your feelings quite seriously. But yeah, there can be a feeling now that the lid has been taken off, and you don't have to be so constrained. I mean, you shouldn't be constrained, and you shouldn't also be of the view that everything has to be 100% right. It doesn't have to be 100% right. I mean, there's still a feeling, perhaps of the Moon opposition Pluto, that you do have to get it right, that you have to make sure that everything is properly sorted out, properly organized. You might be a bit obsessive about it, and if you're too obsessive, you might lose the moment. And it's just important that you're able to sort of float free and perhaps give yourself permission to make the occasional mistake. I mean, not serious mistakes, but perhaps you jump to conclusions, you say things which may not be 100% true, you might have got some of your facts mixed up, but it doesn't matter. The point is, you're getting the broad message out, and I think that is that is something that really does matter. And you can be energetic now. Mars is still trine Jupiter heliocentrically, so that heliocentric Mars trine Jupiter, okay, it's not exact, but it's still there, and it should give you a continued lift. And so Sagittarius, that it should be a pretty good day. I'm not saying it's going to be an incredibly dramatic day, but I think it's going to be good enough. And of course, it's important that you don't allow yourself to be brought down by sort of nitpicking concerns. That might not just be about Moon opposition Pluto, it might be about Mercury opposition Saturn. Remember, Mercury still moving through Virgo, and with Mercury opposition Saturn, it could be that some of your ideas, some of the things you say, are questioned, or you try to be enthusiastic, and someone or something sort of pours cold water on it and sort of says, no, that's no good. You haven't got your facts right. But don't worry about that too much. You can't be expected to get everything 100% right. And today, ideally, there would be something sort of experimental in the air. It's okay to experiment, to play with ideas. You have a theory. You want to try something out. Yeah, sure, it's not 100% perfect, but it's good enough. And with that approach, Sagittarius, I think that you can move forward. But just some people are just overly obsessed with getting things 100% right, or they might not like the way you're going, they might not like what you're saying, and they may come up with petty criticisms. But it's stuff that by and large should be brushed aside. Capricorn, the issue of delusion might be quite important to you at the moment. Now, I'm not saying that you are deluded. I'm just saying that the issue of delusion could matter, and that might be about other people's delusion. And right now you have the capability of seeing behind things. People can claim all sorts of things. Society can be fixated on certain fantasies, and you just know it's all untrue, it's all nonsense. And so this is quite a good thing, that you're able to get to the absolute basics of things, and being able to really perhaps understand why people are claiming what they're claiming. You can really start to see the underlying motivations, and always ask yourself these questions. I mean, at the same time, you can see in yourself the capacity to be deluded. I mean, every Capricorn has got an inner optimist, and you can see how it would be really nice to be able to be optimistic, to take everything at face value. And if you were lazy, I suppose you could, but that's unlikely to happen. You're going to be realistic, and perhaps today, realism is your strength. And the moment you drift into sort of speculative thinking, you perhaps start to see things in a sort of a favorable light, then something starts knocking on the door, something taps on the door, something says, are you sure about that? Are you really sure about that? And you look at it again, and you just see it, for what it is. And maybe this is how Mercury opposition Saturn is manifesting. Mercury opposition Saturn, it is the main aspect today. I think it is the most important aspect of the day. And this Mercury opposition Saturn is arguably about you having serious thoughts. You thinking about how things really are, and analyzing and coming to conclusions. And these thoughts may not be pleasant, but perhaps they're just necessary to have. And it may not just be about your thoughts, it may be about the things you say. And so with Mercury opposition Saturn, that is quite a verbal opposition, in the sense that it talks about words, whether words are being used or not being used. Now, you could say Mercury opposition Saturn means that you are challenged by words. You are uncomfortable with speaking your mind. I mean, you might see things clearly, but do you really want to tell people what you see? You might just want to keep it to yourself. Alternatively, Mercury opposition Saturn can just be quite harsh. It can be about you just telling everyone what you think, and you tell it as it is. And not everyone is going to like to be told the truth. But right now, Capricorn, I think that the truth is a virtue, and it's something you should be striving for. And yeah, it might not be much fun, but I think that people need to be aware. And don't forget that the Sun is starting to move towards an opposition of Saturn. And it's not just Mercury moving towards Saturn; it's the Sun as well. And so those aspects, they can be quite challenging. But it's Sun and Mercury in Virgo, and Virgo is a down-to-earth sign, and it is focused on what matters, what details matter, and that it can't be avoided. You'd like it all to be avoided, I think, at some level. You'd like everything to be fine, but it's not fine. And if there are problems, if there have been miscalculations, the sooner they are discussed, the better for everyone. Aquarius. Well, we have Mercury opposition Saturn, as I was just saying to Capricorn. And this Mercury opposition Saturn is very likely to have an effect on you, because Saturn is your ruler. Saturn is the planet that rules Aquarius. It's not Uranus, by the way. That's just a sort of a modernism. But so with Mercury opposition Saturn, that could be a challenge. And perhaps you were thinking that everything was starting to resolve. You'd like everything to resolve, and you'd like everything to be straightforward, to be clear-cut. And Mercury opposition Saturn is a reminder that it's not, that things are maybe sort of more complicated than you'd like them to be. And you can't avoid that fact. And so, Aquarius, it just might be a day when you need to be realistic. Don't kid yourself. Don't allow other people to kid you. Don't allow other people to kid themselves. And this might relate to money, for example. There may be a temptation to gloss over money, to say that money is not important, that one should be thinking about other things. But with this Mercury opposition Saturn, I think that there is an awareness that, at some level, money just can't be avoided, but things do have to be paid for. And if you find that people are just underestimating money, then perhaps you need to clear up the confusion and be very clear that but perhaps something can't be done, that something is unrealistic, and it applies not just to your money, it applies to everyone else's money. And perhaps when you look at the world around you and people's approach to the economy and how they're planning a future, it just may not be as good as it used to be. And so that Mercury opposition Saturn, it's not going to weigh in on you personally. I don't think that Mercury opposition Saturn is going to make you necessarily feel down, but it's going to be a spark, and it's going to sort of encourage you to think very carefully about what is happening, and so do try to be as down to earth as possible. And at the same time as all of this, we've got Moon opposition Pluto, and so we've got these two oppositions: Mercury opposition Saturn, Moon opposition Pluto. They appear different, two very different energies, but maybe they're saying the same thing. They are oppositions. They're talking about differences and the fact that people can't agree, and there might be misunderstandings. And you've got Pluto's moving through Aquarius, and you are trying to create a new future for yourself, I hope. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the past, but things could always be better. And Pluto with Pluto in Aquarius, I'm hoping that you're being quite individualistic about it. But then the Moon opposition Pluto, that might be someone trying to get through to you, and someone who has a particularly fragile, there's a sort of fragility to them, and perhaps part of that fragility is that they've got ideas, they think that certain things are true, and when of course they're not true at all. And so maybe part of today is bringing other people down to earth, also bringing yourself down to earth if need be. I think that at the moment Aquarians would like to believe something to be the case. You really would like to believe something is true, and that belief has been knocked repeatedly. External circumstances, events have just suggested that belief may be sort of misfounded, maybe just be too sort of optimistic, and maybe over the course of the today it becomes clear that whatever that belief was, that it's just not grounded on anything. And so that's another reason why there could be a feeling of real I won't say despondency. I mean, it's good to know the truth. I mean, you can be despondent when you see things for what they really are, but maybe that's just a sort of an intermediate phase. Because remember, Mars is about to change sign. I mean, Mars changes sign, I think, in just under a week. Mars is going to move out of Libra into Scorpio. And maybe all of this is preparatory for Mars moving into Scorpio. I mean, Mars moving into Scorpio, from an Aquarian view, is something that you should be looking forward to. Okay, it's quite tough, Mars moving into Scorpio, but Mars is moving into its own sign. It's challenging for an Aquarius, because when Mars moves into Scorpio, it makes a square to Pluto, in Aquarius. It makes a square to your sign, so it is a challenge. But Mars moving into Scorpio can be a time when you can really get things together, and maybe you have to go through a phase of seeing things, as they are, divesting yourself of old fantasies, delusions. It's all going, and you're seeing things in absolute black and white. It's real. It's a bit gritty, but it's the truth. And so now, Aquarius, you're perhaps just preparing yourself for a transition, and I think that you should be happy about it. Okay, you might not be happy, but if you're seeing things as they are, in the end, that's got to be good for you. I'm just really quite convinced about that. Pisces. It was nice when the moon was in Cancer, but now it's not. It's in Leo, and so the moon moving into Leo, from your perspective, things are perhaps a bit slower, and things aren't quite so relaxed and happy, and you now have to look at things in a new way, and you have to perhaps address yourself to certain things that have been put on hold for too long. And so, whatever it is, that you need to do, but perhaps you should have done it a long time ago, earlier in the summer if you're in the northern hemisphere, I suppose earlier in the winter if you're in the southern hemisphere. But you now know what should be done, and the moon is making an opposition to Pluto. So the moon opposition to Pluto, it can be quite an obsessive aspect, and obsession isn't always such a bad thing. You might decide obsessively that something needs to be sorted out, and the sooner you get it done, well, the better. Certainly the better for you. And additionally, we have got an opposition between Mercury and Saturn across the main axis of your chart, because you've got Saturn in Pisces and Mercury is exactly opposition Saturn. And this aspect, I've already talked about it, but it may have something to do with relationships. It may have something to do with another person, someone who is perhaps trying to get your attention, could be. But Saturn, I regard Saturn as being you, because Saturn is in Pisces. It's saying something about yourself and your attitude. And you could be quite dismissive. You may not be in the mood for listening. People have got things to say. They want to be heard, especially now the moon is in Leo. Moon is in Leo can represent sort of a lot of fragile egos, people wanting attention, wanting flattery, and maybe there are people that want your attention and they want you to say nice things to them. And normally Pisceans are quite good at that kind of stuff, but today, not necessarily. With Saturn now in your sign, there is a harshness to you. I mean, there's a harshness to this aspect, Mercury opposition Saturn. And the question is, how is that harshness going to manifest? It could be, Pisces, that you ignore someone. Someone is desperate for attention, but you don't want to give them attention. Or there's another way of looking at it. Mercury opposition Saturn could be that you think you've got everything sorted out. You may be very sure that you've got everything sorted out, and you don't really want to move from the position that you've created for yourself. But then Mercury opposition Saturn could be challenging. It could be that something is said to you that you might not appreciate, but you also recognize that it's important. Okay, it might not be something that's said to you. It might be something that's written to you. It might be something you read. You just read something, and it's a challenge to all your assumptions. So while it's good that Saturn is in Pisces, while it is allowing you to create a structure for yourself, you don't want that structure to be too rigid. And it might be based on things which are not always true. And with Mercury opposition Saturn, you might start to understand something, and perhaps understand your own mistakes. And if you're mature about it, you'll be pleased and you'll make the necessary corrections. And so, Pisces, I'd like to have been sort of more optimistic about today, but I think it's a day that could be a bit gritty. But I'm not saying it's going to be a bad day. I just think it's a day when you need to address your various responsibilities and know how to deal with people, and also know how to deal with the information coming your way. You've got to be open-minded, but at the same time you've got to hold firm to the things you believe in, provided your beliefs are properly grounded. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and it's now time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first and only hexagram I got was hexagram number 51, which is thunderbolts. Now, this hexagram does seem to come up quite a lot. I mean, more than usual, I think. I mean, I haven't done a statistical analysis of what hexagrams come up. I should have been taking a note, but I didn't or haven't been. And, thunderbolts, it's quite a dramatic hexagram. It's about shock. I mean, as its name implies, you think everything is fine, you're going about your daily business, and then suddenly something happens that you absolutely weren't expecting. And you assume the worst, as you might with Mercury opposition Saturn. So with this aspect today, Mercury opposition Saturn, it's an aspect that can be quite negative, and we look at things in the worst possible light. And so if something bad happens today, we're going to assume with Mercury opposition Saturn, or we're likely to assume that it really is the end of the world, that it is a complete disaster. Of course, it's not a disaster, and one of the messages that we read regarding the thunderbolts is that, if we keep our cool, then amidst all the drama of the thunderbolts, we can just keep going. We can keep going with our daily routines, with our daily rituals. They needn't be interfered with by the thunderbolts, however bad things seem to be on the surface. And it's kind of interesting here that we have no moving lines. So thunderbolts as a hexagram is very active. It requires movement. It is about movement, yet there are no moving lines. So what does that mean? It might mean that we're just feeling in a state of being ready for something. We assume that things are bad, but where is the action? Where is the thunder? We can sort of feel the thunder. We can feel that something momentous is about to happen, but where is it? It doesn't manifest because there are no moving lines. And so that might mean that this hexagram is very much about our state of mind. We just might be assuming it's the end of the world, but it just might be just a feeling of doom and gloom. And, again, Mercury opposition Saturn can be a feeling of doom and gloom, but the actual spark, doesn't happen. And to give us more idea about the way this hexagram is working, because it's locked and it can be difficult to interpret a locked hexagram, we can look at the nuclear hexagram, the hexagram in the middle. And the nuclear hexagram is hexagram number 39, obstruction. So obstruction is a situation, where we can't move. I mean, we can move back if we want. We can maybe stay where we are, but we certainly can't move forward. And so, we are stuck, or many of us might feel stuck. And because we're in a rather stuck position, perhaps quite an exposed position as well, we might assume that, if we stay here much longer, something dreadful is going to happen. And will it happen? I don't think it will, because there are no moving lines. So maybe this hexagram thunderbolts is more about our state of mind. And, yeah, it's good to be prepared for the worst, but will the worst happen? I don't think it will. And perhaps instead we should just regard it as a time where we need to prepare. I'm not even saying anything bad will happen. We can prepare. We can think about what could happen. It's not just about ourselves. It's about the society in which we live in. But I think overall this hexagram is probably more psychological than anything that will sort of happen in the real world. So let me finish off by considering the opposition between Mercury and Saturn. So here is the chart for the Mercury-Saturn opposition. Did it somewhere? Here it is. So this is the time of the exact Mercury-Saturn opposition, which takes place at 28 degrees 47. So Mercury is at 28:47 Virgo, Saturn is at 28:47 Pisces, and the aspect takes place at 6:47 p.m. London time this evening on Wednesday. And I've already talked about the Mercury-Saturn opposition in general. I think that the Mercury-Saturn opposition just might be a time where many of us feel just quite negative. I've gone on and on about the Mercury-Saturn opposition when going through the 12 signs. It just may be a feeling that just things are blocked, and we could regard things as, we could see things and perceive things just in the worst possible light. There are many ways in which we can see an input, but with Mercury opposition Saturn, there's a tendency to see it as being the worst. And also with Mercury opposition Saturn, again, I'm repeating myself here, but it can be about the way we communicate. Mercury opposition Saturn means that we just don't want to say anything because we're afraid. The words just don't come out. The words are stuck. We might be tongue-tied. Or Mercury opposition Saturn, we might be able to communicate, but the things we say might be quite harsh, cutting. It can be quite insulting, Mercury opposition Saturn. Saturn is not just about something being stopped, it's about something being distorted. And we were perhaps encouraged to vent our frustrations, because it is quite a frustrating aspect, Mercury opposition Saturn. So we vent our frustrations, and we can vent that through anger, through insults, and so that's a way it can manifest. And it may not just be us, it may be other people. So observe other people's behavior. What are they saying? What are they not saying? So there is an overall feeling of negativity with this aspect. And to get a further idea about Mercury opposition Saturn, it's always a good idea to consider the midpoints it's on. And so if we look at the 90-degree dial for Mercury-Saturn, so remember it's Mercury-Saturn opposition. So on the 90-degree dial, it's shown as a conjunction, and so there it is, Mercury and Saturn together. And one midpoint that this Mercury-Saturn is on is the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So the Mars-Uranus midpoint is, I believe, at 14 degrees 10 Leo. So this Mercury-Saturn opposition is sort of semi-square sesquiquadrate, the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And so that perhaps tells us something about Mercury-Saturn. It is quite a tense aspect. It's maybe quite angry with Mars-Uranus. There are things we want to say, there's things we want to do, maybe not just us, but people out there in the world. People feel frustrated, and perhaps they feel ignored, and they perhaps have to do something. So if everyone is ignoring us, then Mars-Uranus, we want to do something very dramatic. It may not be us, it may be countries, political groups, and it is a difficult time in which we're living. We know that, and I think that this Mercury-Saturn opposition is particularly powerful. And also, don't forget, it's on the Aries point. I mean, it's close enough to the Aries point. It's within 1.5 degrees of the Aries point. And so, as far as midpoints are concerned, I think that 1.5 degrees would be the absolute maximum orb for an aspect of the Aries point. But I think it's just there. I mean, it's not exactly there, but it does indicate with this Mercury-Saturn opposition, it might be something that is felt by the world at large. It's not just an individual thing. And it may just say something about people's mood, people's expectations, and the expectations, for example, regarding the economy. And there is a grimness to this Mercury-Saturn opposition. And so whatever people are involved with, whatever they regard as being important, they may just recognize that really it's going nowhere, and that might influence their behavior. And on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, that could manifest as a violent response to this. If you feel the situation is hopeless, then you might feel you have to do something. And if you're a political group or an armed group or a government, you might just feel you have to do something to resolve the deadlock. So that is a way in which this Mercury-Saturn opposition could work. And we should not see this Mercury-Saturn opposition in isolation. I mean, that I think is important, because the Sun is going to make an opposition to Saturn very soon, in a few days' time. And we have a new moon partial eclipse coming up over the weekend, which is at 29 degrees Virgo. So that's opposition Saturn. So Sun and Mercury, they're hitting Saturn close to the Aries point. And of course, we do have the equinox coming up, from the northern hemisphere perspective, the autumnal equinox coming up. So it's all happening at the same time. And so Mercury opposition Saturn is part of a process. It's part of a process of people really realizing maybe how bad things are. And I do think that now things are getting bad. And I know that we've just had a load of bad stuff happening. That the world seems to be exploding, but is that process over? I don't think it necessarily is over, and I do think that the equinox with Saturn tied up with the equinox, and the fact that you've got a partial eclipse close to the equinox, that is quite major, and I will be looking at it again in a few days' time, and I'll be looking at a number of different charts that will be impacted by this. But so I will start by looking at some charts, which I think we need to think about. So here is a chart of one of the charts of England. I've got December the 25th, 1066. Although that's December the 31st if you convert it to the Gregorian calendar. And the thing about the English chart is that the moon is at 29 Pisces. Now, by the way, this is in 1066. I must make it clear, England does not have its moon on skeet because of the precession of the equinoxes. The fixed stars move, and in 1066, skeet was not at 29 Pisces. I just thought I would point that out. But this Mercury-Saturn opposition is hitting England's moon, and that's a reminder that Saturn is opposition England's moon. So Mercury is like a trigger, and we've got other triggers coming along because Saturn's going to be opposition England's moon in a few days' time, and that tells us something about the country and how uncomfortable the country is with itself. And sort of last weekend there was this huge demonstrations in London. I mean, the sort of mainstream media was saying, I think, over 110,000 people on a demonstration, and other people are saying it might have been several million. maybe the mainstream media and the government was just deliberately underestimating how many people were on that march. And this was happening when Saturn was opposition the moon. The moon is the people. And with Saturn opposition the moon, Britain's moon, England's moon for 1066, the people are unhappy. The peasants are revolting. They're not happy with the Starmer government, and so this Mercury opposition Saturn on England's moon, it's probably going to be difficult to say how it manifests because things are already pretty bad, and of course Trump is about to have a state visit to England, to the UK, and one wonders, with this Mercury-Saturn opposition at the same time as Trump's visit, is it going to be a successful visit? I'm not convinced about that. So that's England, and now I just want to look at a few people, some of them who I don't know very much about, who might be influenced by this Mercury-Saturn opposition. For example, Kim Kardashian, a reality TV star. I don't know anything about her. I don't have any interest in her, but I do have a time of birth for her, and her midheaven is at 28-27 Virgo. So that means she would have a Mercury-Saturn opposition on her midheaven. And it's more than that, because Kim Kardashian has her moon at 28-9 Pisces. So Kim Kardashian would have Saturn conjunct her moon and Mercury conjunct her midheaven. In fact, Mercury is conjunct her Jupiter as well. So this Mercury-Saturn opposition is really hitting a sort of a major configuration in her horoscope. Moon on the IC, in sort of at the end of Pisces, Jupiter on the midheaven at the end of Virgo. I don't know what it might mean. I don't really know anything about her, but it could say something about her work. It could say something about her family. It could say something about her well-being. I think it's something that she needs to watch out for. But, when you've got this kind of thing, will we ever know? Probably not. And continuing on the American theme, there is SBF. So SBF is in prison. So remember SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, was sent to prison for a very long time for his role in the collapse of FTX and the fraud involving, remember Bitcoin, which customers of FTX thought they were buying Bitcoin in their accounts, but the money was being used for something else. And Sam Bankman-Fried is, he's now, I think, in a federal prison. And Sam Bankman-Fried's moon is at the end of Pisces. So Sam Bankman-Fried with moon at the end of Pisces. So he's going to have Saturn on his moon. He's going to have Mercury opposition his moon, and of course the Sun is going to be opposition his moon. So that's Sun Saturn opposition Mercury. Over the next couple of days, Sun opposition Saturn, now Mercury opposition Saturn. That does put him under pressure. I mean, I do look at his chart every now and then. He does come up, and I think that while he's in prison, while he's going through all of this over the next few days, it's important that he's looked after. And then there is the governor of Pennsylvania. So the governor of Pennsylvania is Josh Shapiro. And Josh Shapiro, he is potentially influenced by this, because Josh Shapiro has his sun at 28 Gemini. And so if he's got his sun at 28 Gemini, then this then Mercury, the Mercury-Saturn opposition is going to be, it's going to be hitting his sun. Again, I don't know anything about politics in Pennsylvania, but if you are in Pennsylvania, you might want to think about what your governor is doing, and perhaps Saturn opposition his sun might put him under some pressure, and then Mercury is coming along and adding to it. And then of course we've got the sun moving on to make the square to his sun. So he's someone we should be thinking about. And then in a UK context, someone who hasn't perhaps been in the news as much as they have been in the past is Boris Johnson. So Boris Johnson is a Gemini, and Boris Johnson he has got in his chart a Sun-Venus conjunction, and he's got a Sun-Venus conjunction at 28 Gemini. So we can say all sorts of things about that Sun-Venus conjunction. I mean, Venus, Sun-Venus may say something about him and women. I mean, he's had various relationships, and he's got sort of lots of children, and maybe with Boris Johnson there's something about him that is, perhaps he's capable of being quite callous. I think that he comes over as being this bumbling Gemini, but we should never forget that he's got the moon in Scorpio plus Sun conjunct Venus. So I think that there is an unpleasant streak to Boris Johnson. But anyway, his Sun-Venus conjunction in late Gemini is hit by Mercury and Saturn. So Saturn hitting his Sun and his Venus, plus Mercury like being the trigger. I mean, that may say something about his relationship, might say something about his marriage, or it just may be about something that suddenly sort of turns up that he has to deal with. And finally, there is the US Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth. So with Pete Hegseth, we do have a time of birth for him, and Pete Hegseth could well be impacted by this. So Pete Hegseth has his Venus at 29 Gemini. He's got his moon at 29 Pisces. So he's got a moon-Venus square, and so his moon-Venus square is certainly hit by Saturn. So Saturn is hitting his moon. Saturn is square his Venus, and Mercury is triggering it all. So what does this say about Pete Hegseth? Okay, like Boris Johnson, if Saturn is hitting his Venus, that may say something about relationships, other people, the women in his life. But he is the defense secretary, and his moon, that might be him in his sort of public role. I mean, his moon is kind of a bit mixed. I mean, it is in the third house. The moon joys in the third house. On the other hand, it is quite close to Skeet. And so maybe for one reason or another, over the next few days or the next week, Pete Hegseth might be in the news as a result of this Mercury-Saturn opposition. Of course, he's always in the news for one reason or another, but maybe with Mercury and Saturn. And also, very soon he's going to have the full moon eclipse, the new moon eclipse, opposition his moon in Pisces. So there's a lot going on for him, over the next week, and maybe as a result of this, it will get some public attention. So that's all I've got to say on Mercury opposition Saturn. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.